Hello and welcome to Offcuts for the month October for the year of our Lord 2016. If you don't know what this series is, then it's basically where I go and talk about films that I've seen in the previous month, e.g. October, basically going over stuff that I don't have time to review, but films that I really want to talk about for some reason. Some of you may have noticed I haven't published a lot of stuff on my channel for October. That's because I basically had end of year university stuff, but now that is fully out of the way and I'm going to be going ahead and releasing a boatload of stuff. It's kind of been piling up, but it is kind of coming. But that means that I didn't actually watch a huge amount of films in October. I've just narrowed it down to 4 films, all of which I would consider to be good. Usually I split this series into like good films I've watched, bad films I've watched, rewatches of films, and also kind of just weird films that I can't categorize in any of those categories. But here, all the films that I kind of saw were good because I was very selective with what I could watch. So let's promptly get into this. The first film as part of Spooktober, as a result of Halloween, was the Spanish found footage film Wreck. Now I don't really watch a lot of horror. I don't know, like I've seen a bit of classic horror, right? Like Carpenter horror and other stuff like that, you know, the 80s sort of stuff. But that's not sort of stuff I would consider like actually scary horror. I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of just horror generally. I'm sure there's lots of good horror, but it's just never a genre I've ever really explored. I kind of went more down the like, I'm gonna look at classical foreign film pathway, and there doesn't tend to be a lot of legitimately freaky horror in there. Like the closest you'd get is like Nosferatu or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, right? Like they're not really terrifying films. They're still scary, they're still effective, but they're not really terrifying. Wreck, on the other hand, is decent. I like this film, and I think that it doesn't go for the overdone jump scare-a-thons that lots of modern horror films are like. While it does use a fair few jump scares, it really is quite tame with it, and I am fully okay with films doing them as long as they're justified. I'd almost say that as a technique, it is perfectly used here. It doesn't feel overdone. It isn't done out of context just to scare you. It never feels like the film is relying on that. It has a great atmosphere outside of it, and the best thing I can say about it is that it's very genuine. It doesn't feel like, and this is an issue with a lot of found footage films nowadays, is that the reason that someone is recording this whole thing becomes less and less likely. Like you're facing this crazy life or death situation, why the fuck are you still recording? But there's a really great reason here. It's these two people. One is a female reporter and the other is a male cameraman, and we never see the male cameraman, and the thing I like about that is that he is probably the most important character in the film because you're purely seeing the film from his perspective, from his camera, but you never ever see his face. You never see what he looks like, and I find that really interesting as a film technique, as like a study in voyeurism almost. But anyway, this film not only is just a really solid horror film, but it's a very good example of how to do low budget without feeling really cheap. Like the film is noticeably low budget, but it has a nice charm to it and it gets around it very cleverly. Like the whole film is basically set in this one apartment building. In fact, it's almost entirely set there except for the first like 5 minutes. But that just tends to like contribute to this claustrophobic feel rather than just feeling like, oh, they're just like shooting the whole thing in one building. This is total shit. Kind of has that like 12 Angry Men vibe. We're like, wow. They're using, you know, the absolute maximum of the space they've got. And so you really get this dynamic range in terms of what they're able to do just in this one apartment building, which is really cool. And that includes the ending of this film, and without spoiling it, you do get a lot of answers that you wouldn't normally expect to get. And if you've seen the film, then I'm kind of explicitly referring to the fact that the film basically has infected zombies, right? Like the 28 Days Later style of zombie, inverted commas, but they're kind of like infected with a rabbit disease, so they're not really zombies, but they kind of are. It has that style of thing, and I think in the usual apartment building scenario, we're not allowed to go out of this one room. It would be very hard to explain the origins of this disease, or to give it a really interesting lore without giving just enormous amounts of exposition, or just feeling ham-fisted in general. And Trek circumvents that in a very cool way, and in a way that's like aesthetically amazing. And in saying that, yeah, the last 10 minutes of this film are fucking spooky. They're pretty great though. It's a little bit over the top, but I can appreciate it more from like a script basis or like a structural level. Anyway, this is like a 77 out of 100. It's not the most amazing thing I've ever seen, but it's really, really solid. Next up is Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice. Now the thing is that I didn't see this film when it came out. I think I was, doing exams or something. But I'm a pretty big fan of Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, I'm not in love with him or anything, but I think he's made a bunch of really, really good films. And he has one of the better track records of modern directors. I don't think he's really made a dud so far. Punch Drunk Love is probably like his weakest film, but that film's still great. It's fantastic. But the issue for me was that I heard this film was really, really confusing. It was all over the place, so on and so forth. People really didn't respond particularly well to it from the outset and from a critical perspective. And so I kind of went into it with that mindset, and I came out and I fucking love it. Honestly, this is one of my favorites of his, and I'm very surprised there aren't more people who enjoy this. I know, of course, there are probably small groups who are absolutely obsessed with it, and I totally agree. But as a whole, I'm surprised this wasn't more well received. Basically, the main complaint I heard was that it was super duper confusing and the plot was all over the place. But it never really felt like that to me. I had no trouble following it. And that's not to really brag or anything, because I didn't think the plot was particularly complex. Of course, it's like a little bit muddy because of like the literature style it's going for, and also because, it's a fucking mystery film. Of course, you're not gonna have everything answered immediately, but it's pretty clearly explained by the end, kind of exactly, what happened in the film. And in saying that, I didn't really find the pacing particularly weird, which was another complaint I heard. It felt, obviously it's like a slow burner, but I never really felt like it was going way too slow or way too fast or whatever, This is like one of Paul Thomas Anderson's most picturesque films. I'd say The Master is probably his best visual film, simply because it's shot on like 70mm and it just looks amazing. But some of the cinematography here is just beautiful. It's like a Wes Anderson film almost in parts, and I don't know, I just love the cinematography. It's really moody, it's very like sharp and colorful in other parts, and really beautifully framed and blocked and structured, and just it has such a good comedic sense and timing to it. And I mean, Joaquin Phoenix also helps with that. This obviously doesn't beat his performance in The Master, because that performance is amazing yet again, but he does a fantastic job playing this like stoner hippie detective character. And it's probably Paul Thomas Anderson's like funniest film next to Punch Drunk Love. I think they're kind of comparable in the weird, quirky attitude that they have compared to like the ultra serious There Will Be Blood, or the serious Master, or the serious Boogie Nights, or the serious but kind of with a slight quirky edge Magnolia. And then Punch Drunk Love is all the way in the kind of insane, crazy, wacky playtime zone. In saying that, one of my central issues is that sometimes the comedic tone kind of contrasts a little bit too hard with the dramatic angle that they're trying to go for. But besides that, I don't really have a lot to complain about with this one. I mean, there's like maybe some very small things, but besides that, I absolutely love this film, and I'm probably going to revisit it simply because of the complexity of the narrative. Anyway, this is an 86 out of 100 for me. Next up, and following the Spooktober tradition, is It Follows. Now, straight up, I think this film is very interesting in terms of premise and execution, but I actually don't want to go into this too much because I'm going to be making a video essay on this film. In fact, I'm probably about halfway done with it. I think this is an excellent premise, and it's done very well aesthetically. In saying that, the plot does fall a little short, and it's just a bit meatless outside of the premise and the aesthetic, and especially in regards to the ending of the film, I felt like that really began to fall apart in terms of these like weird logical inconsistencies. Anyway, besides that, I think it's really pretty solid, not incredible, and I think it could have been quite a bit better, but in saying that, it's still an 80 out of 100 for me. Next up is Kung Fu Panda 3, because why not? Just a little like low-key fact here, I fucking love Kung Fu Panda. I think it's extremely underrated. Just typically I'm like a sucker for Chinese martial arts stuff. I'm not a huge fan of wuxia or wuxia. I don't know how to fucking pronounce it. You know when people are like flying around on wires. But in terms of just Chinese martial arts stuff, fucking sign me up. That's why I love Avatar so much. On top of it being amazing, I'm just naturally drawn to like the historical angle and the lore of these places. Kung Fu Panda is no exception. I think the first film is okay. In fact, I'd even say that it's decent. It's the origin story film done a little differently and done pretty well. Visually, quite incredible. I just love the choreography in these films, just in general. But the main reason I like, not so much the series, but I like just kind of the brand, I guess, is that the second film is just a huge step up from the first one. You've got Gary Oldman playing a fucking peacock. Very well, of course. His voice acting is fantastic. In fact, his acting is fantastic. Now we get to add a fucking peacock to the absurd variety of characters that Gary Oldman has played. His range is so fucking broad that he can play anyone, including a peacock. So congratulations, Gary Oldman. You win again, except for winning an Oscar, which you're never gonna get. I'm sorry. Now, in saying that, this third film is probably by quite a large margin the weakest of the three. I'd say it sits like a significant notch below the first film. And the reason for that is that it kind of falls into the Mad Max Thunderdome territory, which is funny because it's also the third film in the trilogy, and also the second Mad Max film was the best, so yada yada yada. In that it has an okay beginning. It's not amazing, but it's like, it's doing well. And then it introduces all these really annoying kids who, for some reason, have an impact on the plot. It has that really dumb trope of like, look at all these little kids defeating this big bad guy. Isn't that hilarious and wacky? Yeah, not really. I'm sure you can do it well somehow, but I've never seen it done like that, and all it does is kind of like undermine how scary the main antagonist is meant to be. J.K. Simmons does a good job voicing him, but he has no character, and in no way is he as complex as Gary Oldman's character in the second film. Plus, there's this kind of gimmick of Poe's father turning up, but it's not really explored very well at all, and for some reason Bryan Cranston is playing his father, but he doesn't really have enough room to give any sort of like meaningful performance, despite him being a really good actor. There's some decent action in this, but I mean, it's come to be expected from all of these. The only sections I really liked were these fantastic spirit realm sections, and it's simply because they look like a DMT trip and they're just beautiful. But besides that, it's playing it safe in that it's going straight for the kid angle, whereas the second film was risky because it went for this like dark, weird kind of vibe in parts, and that's the reason it's fantastic, and it's the same sense that it can appeal to really any age range. It's not very good. It's like a 58 out of 100. Apparently there's meant to be 6 of these, or at least the original director envisioned like a 6-part film series, so hopefully they pull a Mad Max Fury Road and create an absolute piece of art. Anyway, that's it for Offcuts. This is like a low-key, low-energy Offcuts while I kind of recuperate from exams and also simultaneously work on something like 15 or 16 videos. This is the third one out of those, but I'm going to be releasing basically one every 2 to 3 days, I think. Yikes. Yeah, it's going to be painful. Anyway, click on these links. This is the new YouTube thing, I think, if I decide to put this in. It's sparkly. I don't know, just click on it. I'm going to go to sleep in 3 minutes. So, yeah, goodbye. Have a lovely day.